Welcome to Psych Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Jessica Rabin, a licensed clinical psychologist. If you are a mental health professional, student in the social science field, or just interested in psychology and mental health, this podcast is for you. Although topics discussed on this podcast are similar to therapy, Psych Talk is not a replacement for therapy and is for educational and entertainment purposes only. So let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Psych Talk, and thank you so much for joining me for today's episode. Today, I have a very special guest with me, Lauren Larkin, who is a licensed mental health counselor. So Lauren, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I know I told you beforehand, but I'm so excited for this conversation.
I am as well, and I'm so excited just to chat with you. For the listeners, we've already been chatting for 31 minutes, and then we're like, we should probably hit record.
We should
So,
probably do what we came here to do.
so before we jump into the very exciting conversation we're going to have today, can you just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, what you do, and anything else you really want to share?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Lauren Larkin. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, as you said. I live in Manhattan. I went to NYU for my master's in mental health counseling. I've been a therapist. I was trying to figure this out earlier. I count it like from when I started seeing clients. So I think like 7 or 8 years. I don't know. Again, not good with math. Um, but I'm a licensed therapist in New York, and I have a team at LEL Therapy. We're a virtual team of all women currently, and there's 6 other clinicians, including myself. So we specialize in eating disorders, trauma, relationship issues, and anxiety, and just like anything that comes up. Like, we're not turning people away. Like, if you feel like we're a good fit for you, unless there's something that we're not specialized in, we would love to support you. So that's kind of what we do in the day to day, or what I do is kind of run that practice, see my clients. And I also run one group per week for sexual assault survivors. So that's kind of like my specialty as a person in the world. And I also do funny, silly little videos that sometimes have something to do with therapy and sometimes have absolutely nothing to do with therapy on the internet. And I'm so glad that it brought me to people like you, because that's been the best part, is the community that has grown through social media and the opportunities and all the good stuff. So yeah, that's me.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And obviously, at the end, I will ask you to share where people can find you, connect with you. But if you're not following Lauren, please do, for many reasons. But like, she's a world traveler, and I get jealous. And also, best fashion sense.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
I look at your outfits all the time, and I'm like, I do not have nearly
No,
the fashion sense that Lauren does.
I appreciate it so much, because even sometimes I feel like I have the worst fashion sense. So whenever somebody says that they like it, I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much. It's the best compliment ever.
No, like your outfits in Paris, I'm like, oh my gosh.
I
Like, I
worked
don't
hard on
even,
those.
yeah,
I put in the work for those ones.
those were great. So obviously you just gave a little overview about LEL therapy, and one of your specialties is eating disorders. So can you share a little bit about how you came to specialize in eating disorder work?
So I'm a career changer. Originally, I wanted to work in entertainment in some capacity. I went to school in Nashville, and I basically wanted to be like Samantha Jones. Okay. So
Okay.
that was the vibe. And I didn't really have the language at the time to express that I had struggled with an eating disorder since I was young. Like,
Mhm.
there weren't people talking about it online when I was like trying to find someone else who was struggling with it. I didn't really know how to talk about it, but I knew it was a disorder. Like, I knew there was something wrong and off there. So long story short, I got treatment myself, and I went to PHP. No, what's the more intensive one? I went to residential, and then I went to PHP. I did the whole step down, the whole process. Thank you to my mother's insurance and still being on her insurance that I was able to do that. And I had this whole like, okay, what am I going to do with my life moment
Mhm.
after that? Because it's like, okay, now I've gone through this really intense, hard thing. I've learned so much about myself. I want to do things differently. I don't really think I should go back into the goals and the career and the path that I had before. Like, it felt too
Mhm.
transformative to do that. And I, again, long story short, decided to become a therapist. And I really did want to help the people like me,
Mhm.
people with the same, we're a lot of us are wounded healers, I guess is the term. And I was like, if I could help somebody the way that I had been helped, that would feel meaningful. That would feel like I'm turning my story into something important, right? Or giving back in a certain way. So that was my original goal. And then I was like, wait, I just like love this. This is so fascinating to me. Like I was like, I don't think I just want to work with eating disorders. I'm so interested in all these other parts, right, of this work, which is just, it's like a never ending thing. If you're a lifelong learner, like you just keep learning more and more about different approaches. And I love relational work. So I've always been good with people, and it's really been so enriching to be working with people for so long term now at this point in my career too. So I specialized in eating disorders originally because of my story, and because I did find that just teeny tiny bit of self-disclosure went so far when it came to connecting with clients and helping them feel not judged at all, because there's an element of, oh, I understand what you're going through, and I really understand what you're going through. I can actually speak to it in a way that maybe somebody can't. When I say, I imagine you might be feeling XYZ, I'm pulling that from both my personal experience and my clinical expertise. And my two supervisors throughout the time of getting licensed were also recovered. So, or in recovery, depending on the term. We can talk about the terms and the difference and if one exists and whatever. But they really helped me with the both personal and clinical side of things. And I was exposed to getting to work with people who struggled with disordered eating. So it just kind of evolved. And then for me, the overlap between people who've experienced trauma and experience eating disorders, it almost started to feel a little bit like unseparable. Like, and the trauma work that I do is like so important to me. So I really just started to kind of like evolve into this niche of these two higher acuity presentations, I guess, in clients. And then as a private practitioner, you know, we do see so much of just the day to day and life transitions, and everybody's experiencing anxiety right now. And a lot of people in New York City are young and want to date and don't know what is going on in their relationships. And so that's kind of like how my 4 buckets evolved, because they were also intertwined, I guess. But that's how I became specialized in eating disorders, was from my own personal experience, and then from ending up by happenstance with 2 supervisors who had the same story, kind of.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I mean, even just hearing what you said when I asked you to introduce yourself, you know, trauma, eating disorders, anxiety, and relational issues. I have never worked with somebody who has an eating disorder that didn't also have anxiety of some sort.
Right.
You know, whether it generalized OCD, even though that's categorized as a different disorder
Still
category now.
envelops anxiety
But,
in some capacity. Yep.
Or even if it doesn't meet clinical criteria. Trauma, like you said, I mean, I've done so many continuing eds on like trauma and eating disorders and how that comes up. And then, you know, you and I both know how eating disorders impact relationships, and how relationships can impact disordered eating behaviors. So in my mind, it makes sense that you would kind of have all those specialties, because you probably see all of those things to some extent in every client you work with.
Exactly. It's either one, or it's all, or it's 2 out of 3, or you know, something's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned recovered or in recovery, depending on how you look at it. And your workbook, the Eating Disorder Recovery Reset, came out in July, beginning of this month when this episode comes out. So can you talk a little bit about this workbook and what inspired you to create it?
So I've always wanted to write a book, and I love writing. I actually like had a poetry account for a hot minute. Like I've been all over the place.
I'm learning so much about you.
All the different passions. I've never said that probably anywhere, but I was always like drawn to the idea and the medium of writing. I love writing. I love putting my story into words. And so I was approached about this workbook, basically from the publisher, as like a gap in the market. And I was like, you're right, there is a gap in the market. And then I started to like kind of pitch myself and figure out, you know, talking to people. And I was actually told at one point, like, ongoing recovery is not something that you should write a book about, because you should be selling hope. People want to know that it can end and it can be over. And I was like, that's not real life. though.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my clinical experience. That's not my personal experience. Anyone who works in a treatment center will tell you they have seen people multiple times
Mm-hmm.
before recovery sticks. Like, there's just not a world where I could say to you, yeah, for sure, you're never going to struggle with your eating disorder again. I hope you don't. Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. And I say this to clients all the time. I'm like, if recovered works for you, if that is language that feels perfect for your story, use it. The
Mm-hmm.
language is yours. It's your story. You can use whatever feels right for you, just the same way as I would never force somebody to use certain words in their trauma narrative, right? Like, it's like
Yeah.
whatever feels natural, whatever works for you. I prefer in recovery just because I've seen so many little lapses or
Mm-hmm.
full-blown relapses, or just people struggle at different times. I know you and I offline were talking about parenthood. I've had
Mm-hmm.
lots of clients recently have babies, which is so exciting, but the female body who carries a baby, there is a lot of changes that go
Changes.
into that. So,
Yeah.
body image issues could come up that had never existed before. And if you have struggled with disordered eating or a full-blown eating disorder, that is a time that we could say maybe we need something like this workbook. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you're going through a life transition, we talked about trauma before. I see a lot of eating disorder behaviors as a coping skill
Mm-hmm.
for the trauma or
Trauma.
the relational issues or whatever has come up. And so if that's a coping skill that was the go-to at a certain time, who's to say it might not be a coping skill you accidentally or intentionally reach for at different hard times? There could be grief,
Mm-hmm.
there could be, you could be moving, you could lose a friend, you could go through a breakup. There's so many things that could potentially open up the idea of recovery in your life again. You might
Mm-hmm.
need a little tune up. And that's kind of how I
Mm-hmm.
think of this book is it's 6 weeks. I don't care how long you use it. Like, don't put pressure on yourself. Like, I had to structure it somehow. So it's like a
Yeah.
6 week tune up is sort of how I am presenting it. But I want you to pick it up and put it down whenever it is helpful to you, whenever you need a reminder, whenever you need to go deeper, when you need repetition to ground
Mm-hmm.
you in an exercise that maybe you've been exposed to before. Like, that is the idea behind the book, is to encourage a shame-free model around the fact that you might struggle with this again, and then that is okay. And all you have to do is kind of like ask for more support, and there's no shame in that. So
Mm-hmm.
if you keep it open, I think you might feel less shame than if you said, I'm recovered, and then you have to say, oh, I'm struggling with this again. If in
Mm-hmm.
recovery is just more fluid language for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love so much of what you said there, and I'm sure we'll touch on this later, but like lapse versus relapse. And you said like accidental, and I loved that because something working in a hospital, I see a lot of eating disorders in teenagers when they have to be medically hospitalized for medical stabilization. And, when we're talking about recovery and the journey and things like that, one example I usually give is like, you can be on the path to recovery and then school's really stressful. So you're like, hey, I'm going to skip dinner because I need to study for this test.
Mhm.
And that gives the door for the eating disorder voice to come back in. And now it's like a finals week. So I'm just gonna, study instead of eat. And it's not on purpose.
Yep.
It's, I like how you said accidental, but it can creep in, and having to be aware of those triggers or those life changes, like you said. And it doesn't have to be a big life change, like a move or a breakup or
No, it
something.
could
It
be
could
something
be
so
an acute
small.
stressor that opens the door for the eating disorder to
And
come
even
back.
like
And
something I don't think people notice as much is the lack of self-care. Like you just said, like
mm-hmm,
people get busy and they just
mm-hmm,
stop taking intensive care of themselves. And when they were maybe more actively in recovery,
recovery.
like
Mm-hmm,
every day you're thinking about how am I going to feed myself and what am I going to eat and how am I going to meet my meal plan. And then there's a time I think where people tend to not care about themselves. And I have to tell clients sometimes, like, the lack of attention that you're showing to yourself is actually a symptom of something else. It's
yeah.
might be a sneakier, again, accidental, insidious kind of form of
Mm-hmm,
self-harm, that you're just not thinking about yourself. Why are you not actively thinking about the things that you need and taking care of yourself? Like, but that doesn't sound as much of like a symptom of an eating
mm-hmm.
disorder because it's not as tangible.
Yeah. Oh no, I love that. And it sounds like you and I are on the Same page. I agree with you. If somebody wants to say like they're recovered, use the language that empowers you. But when I'm talking to clients, I always talk about recovery as an ongoing process because
I
I
can
love how
tell.
you highlighted the shame aspect. It's kind of like should. I know that's like a
Yeah.
word us therapists like hate using,
Yep.
but like the finality of it or like the definitiveness of it, like saying I'm recovered. And then if there is a lapse or a relapse, the shame that comes with it because you had this finite term versus
Yep.
in recovery, like you said, is much more fluid.
I was going to say, I can tell we're both very non non-judgmental, yes. But what's the word I was just about to say? It's escaping me. Oh no. Harm reduction. We're both
Harvard.
harm
Oh, yes.
reduction and like self-compassion focused therapists, just by
Yep.
the way that we're speaking about this. Like you just want to reduce the amount of harm that the thoughts or the actions or the words that you're using to describe yourself are going to potentially cause later on.
Absolutely. I love self-compassion work. But speaking of harms, not in the sense of harm reduction, I would love to kind of start this conversation with identifying some myths when
Mm.
it comes to eating disorder recovery, because I think even just the debate of like recovered versus in
That started
recovery
us
could
off
be
really strong. I was
one,
like, perfect segue. Yep.
but
The
what are
idea that you
some
have to be
myths?
recovered. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some
Um,
myths that
yeah.
you see a lot in eating disorder
Other
recovery?
myths, I would say the biggest ones. So, yes, recovered versus in recovery, that it's a one-stop shop or that you close the book and you never open it again, I think is an important one. I think the one that stands out to me the most is the vanity of it all, is this
Hmm.
assumption from somebody who might not be well informed that eating disorders are a narcissistic trait, or that the people who struggle with eating disorders are obsessed with how they look, when it's often, the person who struggles with an eating disorder is not is doesn't want to be seen, doesn't want to be
Hmm.
perceived
Yeah.
actually, and is trying to keep themselves safe. And the safety is in the manipulation of the body, or they're trying to express the pain that is inside that they don't have words or language or any other tools for, and it comes out on the body.
Hmm.
Yes, maybe there's some body checking or some body image stuff where the idea is like I want to look a certain way, but it's that magical thinking of like if I can just get to X, then I'll be happy or loved,
Hmm.
or whatever's a soother for that deeper pain. And it's really not about like, oh, that person's the vainest person in the room, the person
Yeah.
who struggles with an eating disorder. It's often so the opposite. So just continuing to voice that and talk about
Hmm.
that there's a misconception on what drives an eating disorder a lot of the time.
Hmm.
And then that kind of leads me into the fact that an eating disorder does not have a look. It is not a
Yes.
women's issue at all necessarily. It is not the typical smaller body anorexia stereotype.
Hmm.
Larger bodies often get very overlooked. Binge eating
Yep.
disorder often gets very overlooked and very associated with a larger body versus a smaller body. And
Hmm.
that's not necessarily true.
Yep.
People of color get so overlooked in this conversation, and the resources are not as strong, the research is not as strong. I was talking
Hmm.
about pregnancy. I tried to find some articles about eating disorders and pregnancy, don't really exist. They're
No.
not really there. So there's so much misrepresentation of, again, this like vain, tiny body,
Hmm.
emaciated look kind of being the face of an eating disorder. But men are so not talked about in the gym
Yep.
culture and cutting and like all these things that
Hmm.
you're like, if you hear someone talking about it, you're kind of like, that's an eating disorder behavior. And then in these spaces of minorities like that are just not maybe even able to talk about it because it's not acceptable
Hmm.
or spoken about, or there's no one that they can turn to that's recovered out in the media or like any of those things. Like there's some representation, but there needs to be so much more to break down the stereotype that an eating disorder has a look. And I know I'm talking about this as somebody who has a look
Yeah.
of the stereotype of the eating disorder girl. So it's hard because I
Hmm.
try to take up space with my own story because I do feel like I should, but it's
Hmm.
to use that word, or I can, and I want to keep using my voice to talk about these things, but I do want to use my voice to highlight the fact that there is so many other people who don't look like me,
Hmm.
who struggle with an eating disorder and feel like they can't even talk about it because they won't be taken seriously.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I see that quite often in the hospital because
Mm.
obviously, if I'm working in a hospital, I'm seeing the most
You are
acute because
seeing
they need to
it. Yeah.
get medically stabilized. Young boys are, in my experience, this is based off my experience alone, were more likely to end up in the PICU, like the pediatric ICU, because their symptoms were ignored for so long or they weren't identified. And then I've also seen individuals in larger bodies come in and be sicker by all measures of like heart rate, blood pressure, labs,
Yeah.
vitals, because typically their pediatrician, because once again, I work with kids, told them they had to lose weight.
Hmm.
They started doing it in a non-healthy way, typically, or they started doing it in a healthy way. We're getting praised for it. It
Yeah.
turned into a non-healthy way. And then they get to the hospital, and, if you look at just their BMI, I can't believe I'm saying that, but doctors still
There are
use that as a measure.
some measures that are used in a hospital, and that's not your
Yes. You
fault.
look at their BMI and it's like, oh, it's like healthy for their height. And then you look at their growth curve or you look at the labs or vitals, and but they've been overlooked because their weight loss was praised, or, you know, they were doing what was recommended, but not in, well, I was going to say not in the way it was recommended. A lot of times there isn't a recommended way. It's more
Mhm.
just like you have to do this thing. So I love that you highlighted that. Same with individuals of color. I have treated so many young Black women, Hispanic women, teens, and just like from a cultural perspective of, I mean, a lot of families don't understand. Like,
Yeah.
I think if you don't have or you haven't had lived experience with an eating disorder or haven't worked with eating disorders, it's hard to understand from an outsider perspective. But then there's like cultural factors that also play a role, that many white individuals don't experience as well.
Exactly. It's so true. And there was another myth that I was going to say when you were talking.
Sorry.
No, no, my brain is not, maybe I'm not as sharp at 9 p.m. as I thought I was, but no, I've lost it. I've
If
lost
it
it.
if
I'm
it comes
sorry.
back,
If it comes back, I'll tell you
just
another myth.
interject. Yes. So we've already started kind of having this conversation, but this idea of ongoing recovery. So can you talk a little bit about this idea and what it might look like, especially if we're comparing it to like this idea of being recovered?
So I think of it as like you don't have to identify with the eating disorder for the rest of your life. Like
Yeah.
that is not my idea with this. Like I actually sometimes feel like a fraud when I talk about my eating disorder because I'm like I feel so far away from that girl
Hmm.
that it's like she's a part of me, but she's like really not somebody I resonate and vibe with
Hmm.
anymore. So it's like it's I don't need you to define yourself by your eating disorder. You don't have to like present it on a name tag. Like you don't have to think of yourself as a person who is like tied to the eating
Hmm.
disorder when you say you are in recovery. It's more just a mental thing of allowing yourself to be a human,
Hmm.
allowing yourself to have an idea that you might struggle
Yeah.
again in your life. That's literally all I think of ongoing recovery as is like I just consider myself a person who's in recovery right now. That doesn't necessarily mean that my recovery is on the top of mind every day.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean that I think of the eating disorder when I think of myself. It's just that I'm in recovery.
Hmm.
And you could just put it away just the same way as you would if you were recovered. But it's
Hmm.
a shame that I'm trying to protect people from with this language that I hear all the time. Everybody doesn't want to go backwards.
Yeah.
When I'm talking to people in therapy, they're like, I'm going backwards. And I'm like, no, you're not. You're simply not. You went
Yeah.
100 steps forward and you took 2 steps backwards. You're still way ahead,
Hmm.
of where you
Yeah.
were when we first started. And comparison is helpful in that capacity only. Like when you're
Yeah.
just looking at your growth, like that's just what I'm trying to avoid when I adopt this language and when I encourage other people to do it too,
Hmm.
is this just like allowing yourself to be a human. We talked about anxiety before. If you
Hmm.
have generalized anxiety disorder, you might have a flare up. You
Yeah.
might feel more anxious for no reason. There might be nothing going on in your life, and you might experience heart palpitation anxiety one day. And it's like, oh, I have generalized anxiety disorder.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes that happens. Or major depressive disorder. You might have a depressive episode for no reason that makes any
Mhm.
sense. And you might be on medication and you might be doing all the good things and you might just have a depressed day. It's sort of just saying that eating disorders could look like the same thing for some people. And again,
Mhm.
if you are a one and done and you did treatment for a little while and you never think about it again, I am so happy for you. That is
Mhm.
incredible. It's for the people that might have a longer road, which I'm
Mhm.
a psychodynamic long-term therapist, obviously, a relational therapist. Like, I'm a long road girl. I'm with my therapist that I met in treatment. Like, that's just who I am. Yeah, I love her. I saw her
Mhm.
today. But she knows me. She knows everything about me. She's seen me at
Yeah.
my lowest point, and she will always be able to remind me of who I am because of that. Right.
Mhm.
And that's the work that I do. And that's what I feel really passionate about. And I talk to every single client that's ever walked through my door about self-compassion and
Mhm.
not having shame around struggling and it being okay to ask for help. So I think that's what ongoing recovery means to me. And that's
Mhm.
why I feel so passionate about it, and why maybe it doesn't exist is because people don't want to face the fact that they might struggle. But I'm
Mhm.
like, I want you to own it. I want you to have the self-awareness to be like, something's going on with me. Let me just
Yeah.
pick up this book. No one has to know I picked it up. Like, it's the same
Yeah.
way as you might say to your therapist, hey, can I have an extra session this
Mhm.
week? I need a little bit of support. There's no shame in that. We're proud of you for asking for help. We're proud of you for getting the tools that you need. And that's just what I want it to be for people. Like, I want it to just be like a little extra supplement to their
Mhm.
support team and the support that they have in place, or maybe even just, if it's not accessible to you to have as much support, if you can do some of these exercises between your therapy
Yeah.
sessions because maybe you can't afford to see your therapist twice a week,
Yeah.
like maybe that's a helpful thing for you. So it's just kind of trying to normalize the longer road treatment path and not have any shame around it, because I don't think that there's any shame around it. And that's why I say in recovery, sometimes I do use interchangeably recovered because I feel
Mhm.
recovered right now, but I'm not a psychic. I don't have a crystal ball and I don't know how I'm going to feel, per our conversation after kids. I don't know how
Mhm.
I'm going to feel with body changes, which I'm sure are going to happen because as women, this happens all the
Yeah.
time, right? Your body just goes through phases and changes. And like, I just want to leave the door open for myself. And then I
Mhm.
want other people to be able to leave the door open for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So, one,
Yeah.
love so much of what you said there, but a thought I had as you were talking, and I don't know, I had never thought about this before with the like in recovery versus recovered debate, but when you were talking about like, wanting to reduce shame and, you know, kind of setbacks, or two steps back versus 100, I also wonder if having the mindset of in recovery makes people more attuned to those eating disorder behaviors when they creep up versus if somebody says like I'm recovered and then maybe they're engaging in disordered eating behaviors, but they're like no, I'm recovered, so this is not my eating disorder, this is something else. I don't, you're nodding in agreement, but like I don't know why that didn't click, but I don't know, that was just the
No,
thought that I
I
had.
haven't really thought about that too much either. Like, I haven't like put that sentence together myself at all. But I'm nodding in agreement because I totally think it makes sense. And it's
Hmm.
sort of, I see it with trauma too. A lot of people just want to be done. They want
Yeah.
to be done with the work. And I totally get it. I don't want to do the
Yeah.
work either sometimes. Like, yeah, it's so hard. Like,
Yeah.
come on. Like, always being self-aware, always checking in with yourself. Like, come on. It's a lot. And I think that
Yeah.
that's why people just want it to be behind them and never think
Hmm.
about it again. And that's just not real life,
Yeah.
right? And I think once you get to that acceptance place around it, you can have that open door of sort of the mindfulness of like, that's an interesting thought. That's kind of an eating
Yeah.
disorder thought, right? Or, I've been consuming a lot of things lately. It's like the sort of like when you're just kind of walking around and you're like, why am I in such a bad mood? And you kind of have to think
Hmm.
through it of like, well, what was my sleep like? And have I drank any water
Hmm.
today? And, it's like kind of keeping the awareness
Yeah.
space open. And if you close the door on a past with an eating disorder, you might be in denial or might be suppressing some thoughts that might need to come in for a
Hmm.
second, just so we can evaluate them and see, do we adopt this thought or do we send it on its way?
Yep.
You know, do we say, I don't do that anymore, moving on,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
like one of my favorite reframes is it's not even really a reframe. It's like just a like, we don't do that anymore. Move along.
I love that. I might steal that. We don't do that
Please.
anymore.
Oh,
Move along.
please. Yeah.
Go. Toodaloo. Yeah, no, it was just a thought I had because I do think the idea of ongoing recovery, reduces shame. It allows for that intentionality in living life, but also the recognition that like this is part of me and maybe it's something I just have to like keep in the back of my mind. But, you know, my hope for everybody going through an eating disorder and going in recovery is that they get to a day that they're not like thinking about food of like, I need to get my 3 meals and 2 snacks a day and make sure like they can enjoy food for food, but they also have the awareness to be like, huh, I recognize I've been not eating as much, or I've been stressed a lot more lately, and I've been engaging in some behaviors that I used to engage in. Why is
Yeah.
that? Like, take
Just
inventory, reflect on it.
curiosity. Do you do
Yeah,
any parts work in your work?
I don't. I'm actually currently reading No Bad Parts
Yes.
as we are
Okay.
recording this.
I also read Nova Parts. I'm not trained in IFS or
Okay.
anything, but I love all theories and I like to just like pick and choose what I like. And what it kind of reminds me of is the exile. And when you
Hmm.
think about the exiled parts, it's not helpful to trap them away. It's helpful
Yeah.
to just like make friends with them. And so that's kind
Yeah.
of what I was thinking about when you were talking about the eating disorder and like just kind of like the again, the fluidity, like the flow of allowing that part to exist, but it doesn't have to take up too much space. It's
Yeah.
just like, we love you. Like, you're a part of us and like, come on
Hmm.
in. But like, we don't have to trap it away in the basement because that
Yeah.
feels like something bad's going to happen if we do that, you know?
Hmm. Well, and it also feels like shame.
Yes,
Like we
exactly.
suppress and ignore and trap
Yeah.
things that we're shameful of. So, yeah, I love
So,
that.
two non-IFS specialists just mentioning the parts work of it all here.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay, so
Yeah.
thinking of this ongoing recovery, you've mentioned relapses and lapses. So can you speak to what relapses or lapses or the distinction between the two look like in recovery and what relapse prevention may also look like?
Yes. So I corrected myself with lapse because of one of my supervisors, Marty Cooper. He is an amazing therapist and professor in New York. He taught me that you can just call it a lapse. And
Okay.
that's actually a much more friendly
Yeah.
approach and a much less shaming approach to this eating disorder space.
Hmm.
And I think maybe if you work in a treatment center, things might be a little different.
Hmm.
And, relapse might be defined by a set amount of criteria. But
Yeah.
for me, I like to think of any moment that is not a perfect recovery moment as okay, it is a lapse. And I
Hmm.
think that helps with all or nothing thinking. So I know we talked about swearing. I talk about the fuck it mentality in my book. I think I left it in there as fuck it mentality. I don't think I took it out. And I was like, I think I stood 10 toes down on it because it's so common with eating disorders
Hmm.
where you set out to have a perfect day.
Yeah.
And the perfect day involves some sort of caloric intake. I will never use numbers,
Yep.
but something unrealistic and unhealthy, right? And something maybe unrealistic and unhealthy in terms of what's allowed and what's not allowed in your day. You inevitably fail. And that
Hmm.
leads us into the binge, right? So then we say, fuck it. And the whole day is ruined.
Ruined. Hmm.
We eat everything and anything in the kitchen cabinet. I've done it a million times.
Hmm.
And so this idea, I think also of labeling things as a relapse can help us avoid, oh, now I'm relapsing. So
Hmm.
if I did it yesterday, I'm going to do it again today.
Yeah.
And I
Hmm.
might as well do it 3 more times today. It's like, again, the opposite of harm reduction. It's almost like
Yeah.
harm, like capitalization, like
Yeah.
when we sort of think of it in this way. And when we go into that fucking mentality, I think having a word like a relapse is way more likely to have us go off the rails than,
Yeah.
oh, that was a little lapse in
Hmm.
judgment, in recovery, in whatever.
Yeah.
And that wasn't my best move.
Yeah.
And I can use an example of my life post treatment. I was actually going through a breakup or around a breakup. I think I was like really wanting to break up with this person and I was very stressed and I didn't notice it.
Mm-hmm.
Again, to our conversation of just lack of care for
Mm-hmm.
myself. I wasn't setting out to eat a certain amount of things and I wasn't counting anything and I wasn't paying attention. And I went to
Mm-hmm.
the doctor and the blood work did not lie. It was like, no, your blood work is off. You
Mm-hmm.
are not nourishing yourself in the way that you need to nourish yourself. And if I hadn't done compassion work and if I was in a shame based headspace and model, and if I had people around me that were using this type of language, or if I used this type of language myself, I might have been distraught at what a failure
Mm-hmm.
I was at recovery. Instead, it was like, okay, I got to start eating more.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, I have to pay closer attention to what I'm eating, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I got to add some stuff in. What have I been doing? Why have I not been paying attention?
Mm-hmm.
Not in a mean and self-critical way, but in a how did you take your eye off the ball kind of
Yeah.
way. And
Yeah.
that's kind of why I like that language more, is because
Mm-hmm.
it just adds so much more forgiveness and self-compassion.
Yeah.
And I think that's how we motivate ourselves. And that's how we actually make change happen, is from that place versus, well, now I relapsed and who even cares about me? I don't care about
Yep.
myself and I don't care what happens to me. So I might as well just go forward into the self-sabotage place.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that language shift. And I think it speaks to the power of just language and how tweaking one or two words can make such a difference. Because as you were talking, I was like, yeah, if you talk about relapse, I mean, it's the same when we talk about different types of substance use
Yep.
disorders. You know, oh, they relapsed, and like, it's like, okay, I had one drink, so now I'm
Yeah.
might as well have the whole case. And I hear that so much with eating disorders as well. It's like, oh, well, I already ruined what my perfect day was planned out to be. Or, something happened where like my friend invited me out and I didn't know we were going to get, you know, this meal or whatever. And so then, yeah, it's that spiral versus a lapse. It's kind of like, okay, well, yesterday didn't go as planned. What can be
Doesn't mean
different
anything
about
about
today?
today. Yeah, or lunch and dinner could be completely separate.
Hmm.
We could reset every single time we eat a meal. And I talk to clients about that a lot. I'm like, let's just take it meal by meal.
Yeah.
Every time you feed yourself, let's just consider it a new opportunity and see if we can shift our mindset around, because diet starts Monday and the
Yep.
weekend is the worst. Is like people just go into the weekend. And if the weekend has some unexpected like flexibility that's required,
Hmm.
is usually when people find themselves saying, okay, Monday, oh well, now Tuesday, well now
Hmm.
Wednesday. So if we can change it to just every opportunity to eat is a new opportunity to
Hmm.
show yourself that you can do this thing, that tends to help, but it takes a lot of practice. And I am not going to lie, like this stuff is a lot of work. And when you've
Yeah.
messed with your body for a long time, which a lot of people have and not even known it. Like when you've been on Weight Watchers with your mom since you were
Hmm.
12, or, when you've experimented with all the different types of behaviors for a long time, it takes a long time to get your body to trust you again
Hmm.
and to move through the urges to eat everything in the cabinet, because your body really doesn't trust or know when you're going to take it away from it again, like
Yeah.
when you're going to restrict and starve again.
Hmm.
So it takes a long time sometimes, and people don't like to hear that, to get to a place where this pattern doesn't exist anymore, but it does happen. I'm
Hmm.
living proof. Like you can get through to a place where a day can go completely awry. A day can be,
Yeah.
Michael is a great example. My fiance will show up with extra chicken fingers after I've already eaten dinner. And I'm like, okay, I'll have one. Right.
Yeah.
Like, but years and years ago, that would send the whole next day into a spiral. That would be something I would be
Hmm.
thinking about forever, because these unexpected food moments in your day
Yeah.
could potentially send anyone into a complete binge or a
Hmm.
complete restriction for the
Yeah.
next few days or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
I
So
totally went on a tangent. I'm sorry.
no, but that leads me into like, what are some skills or tools that individuals can utilize after a lapse? I'm changing my language.
Okay.
Helps them, or like, what can they use to help them get back on track so it doesn't turn into that like multiple day spiral that we've been talking about?
And that is my hope for this book, is that it's a kind of a combination of the things that helped me, which includes some evidence-based CBT and DBT, which I know every therapist listening to this is going to be like, gross. But I really believe that CBT was so helpful for me with eating disorders. And I do really believe that the thought, feeling, action spiral is very, very important to understand when you are in an eating disorder and when you are experiencing or even experiencing disordered eating and the tendencies that go along with that. So
Mhm.
the exercises in this book kind of combine some thought work
Okay.
and emotion work with the mindfulness and the
Mhm.
self-compassion work and some like DBT type of stuff. And I think distress tolerance is one of my favorite ones, in terms of what we were just speaking to, is
Mhm.
how flexible can you get?
Yeah.
Can we break down your perfectionistic tendencies? Can we break down your thoughts of what's acceptable versus unacceptable when it comes to a meal? Can we sit with something very uncomfortable? And can we
Mhm.
learn how to even distract yourself? Distraction is a huge tool in this book, is like find the ways to get yourself through the desire to use one of these behaviors.
Yeah.
And then my favorite part of the book is, so it's broken down into three different sections: food, body image, and exercise.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the three sections of the book. And then each starts with an inventory, just a check in on where you're at. So, here's all the behaviors, here's
Mhm.
all examples of thoughts, here's, some little checkpoints
Yeah.
to really get real with yourself on like, where are you at? Are you experiencing any of these thoughts? Are you doing any of these behaviors? If you are, how often? What's going on? And then you have this full picture, if you're being honest with yourself and the book, of where are we at right now?
Mhm.
And then there's different exercises, different tools, different whatever. And then there's the relational prompts. So what I would do if I was every single person who's picking this book up's therapist is be like, how did we get here? What's going
Mhm.
on in your world? What's going on with your relationships? What's happening in, like, what may have happened in your childhood that you haven't addressed still? Why are these things lingering?
Mhm.
Because there's some unfinished business here. And maybe if we go a little bit deeper with some of these more relationally focused like journal prompts, we can see if we can uncover something that you can take to your therapist, because everywhere in the book, every so often it's like, please unpack this with a therapist, please.
I
I'm
love
begging
that.
you. I'm begging you. Because we can't do therapy on ourselves, even us. You and I were talking about this before. Like, we can have
Yeah.
all the skills, all the knowledge in the world, and you can't do it on
Nope.
yourself. So if you uncover something, or if you start to get a little deeper into some of these roots as to why is this coming up for me now? Why did I
Mhm.
have to pick up this book now? Or what happened between maybe the last time I was doing some of these exercises? Because the idea is like you have some familiarity with an
Yeah.
eating disorder when you pick up this book, or you've, maybe known for a while you might struggle with this. Like,
Mhm.
what's happening between like the most acute time in your life and now that feels like you need this tune up, that is kind of continuing to bring this up for you? Is it an ongoing relational issue? Is it something from your childhood that's still unprocessed?
Mhm.
What is it? What's going
Yeah.
on here? Is it a confidence thing? Is it, core beliefs that are still just kind of
Mhm.
like undigested, or, like, what are we working with here? So that's my favorite part of the workbook, is
Mhm.
just the going a little bit deeper and just asking those hard questions of yourself, or just sitting with the ideas. You don't have to know the answer, but if you free associate for a little bit, if you just doodle, if you,
Mhm.
if you just are asking the right questions, maybe we're going to get to something. And I think that that's equally, if not more helpful than the repetition, which I do think is very helpful. And
Mhm.
the kind of sort of being strict with yourself on, how are we talking to ourselves? How are we
Mhm.
changing the road that my brain tends to go down automatically? Like, that I know works because I did it.
Yeah.
This is not the same brain that I was using before. Like, I don't know what paths exist now, but thank God I don't know what those other roads are because
Hmm.
I couldn't go back if I tried at
Yeah.
this point because the other road is so well paved. So
Hmm.
it's a little bit of a combination, in my opinion, when it comes to eating disorder work between the being really hard on yourself in a good way, like being really kind of on top of yourself in terms
Hmm.
of self-compassion, like
Yeah.
compassionately beating a new narrative into your brain and then asking the questions of like what's going on that we're still here.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Did any of that make sense? I really hope so.
No, it did. And I mean, I think the theme, I mean, when we've talked about this in other components as we've been talking, is like asking yourself questions, getting curious. So rather than shaming yourself, rather than blaming yourself, rather than being self-critical, ask yourself the hard questions. Get curious about where this is coming from because, a lapse doesn't mean that you are a moral failure. Like, I mean, eating disorder, and you kind of touched on this earlier when you were talking about trauma work, like eating disorder are coping skills for trauma a lot of the time. I'm not
Yeah.
going to use a blanket statement, but I talk to my clients about that a lot too. Like, it is extremely rare that I have had a client who has told me, like, I have no idea where this came from. Like,
Yeah.
maybe initially they're like, I don't know. But, like, after you start asking questions, like, oh, you had this trauma happen, or, you had to switch high schools and it was really, really stressful. And you went from having friends you had had your whole life to not knowing anyone. Or, I live in South Carolina. This has come up a lot. We had Hurricane Helene hit South and North Carolina, and like just the back in what 2024.
Mm.
Yes, yes. I was like time, but like things like that you're like that this happened. It's not related, and then you do the work, and you're like, oh
It's
no,
related
I was just
to
trying to cope.
scarcity, safety, like, but
Exactly.
there's so much there. I really do believe that if you at least just look at it in a different way, and it's like, how did my eating disorder keep me safe? How does my eating
Yeah.
disorder keep me safe? Then it's not like, why am I such a weirdo freak for doing this weird thing? Like I used to think
Hmm.
about myself. I mean,
Yeah.
speaking to myself about myself, I used to think I was just a weirdo who did this stuff that I couldn't talk to anybody about. And I
Hmm.
never would understand if anyone else could understand me. And then I went to treatment and everybody else did all the same things. And I was like, oh my God. Right. So it's like, instead of thinking of how unacceptable you are for doing this
Hmm.
and how you just need to stop it,
Yeah.
it's like, well, how did this keep me safe?
Yeah.
And those are the best questions to ask as a therapist. I love asking those questions
Yeah.
to my client about anything, right? It sounds like this thing is keeping you safe, or this thing is really, really comfortable for you because I'm guessing
Hmm.
it's helped you in some way. How
Yeah.
does it help you?
I love asking
And
that
then we
question.
get to the next part, and it's like, oh, yeah, it has helped me. I don't
Hmm.
need it anymore. How
Hmm.
can I relinquish it? Because it helped me up until now. It's not helping me anymore. It's
Yeah.
creating more problems now.
Problems. Hmm.
Then it's turned maladaptive now,
Yeah.
right? But at a point, it might have been adaptive for you.
Yep.
When food was
Absolutely.
scarce in your house, for example, or when you did associate being smaller or in a smaller body with being less likely to be attacked. I don't know.
Yep.
Those are the types of
Yeah,
things that tend to come up when we're associating why the eating disorder developed in the first place.
absolutely. So you've talked a lot about like mindset, self-compassion, CBT. Um,
Don't tell anybody. No, I'm just kidding.
um, are there other like key, whether they're tools or even like supports that you feel are necessary for longevity in eating disorder recovery? So keep moving forward, even if there are lapses.
It's interesting because I feel like my answer to this question before we talked was like, you're a therapist and, continuing to do the work and continuing to be mindful and like, being on
Hmm.
top of it. I feel like we've covered all of that.
Yeah.
The next thing I want to talk about that I did not think about earlier, but now I'm thinking about it now is like, maybe it's how you like weave it into your life, and
Hmm.
maybe it's surrounding yourself with people who are really encouraging of this type of behavior and being around people who also want to take good care of themselves and want you to take good care of yourself and love food. And, maybe it's about talking about your experiences and being vulnerable with others and sharing it in a way that feels meaningful to you. And maybe it's, continuing to figure out how it can be a part of your story, but not, again, the whole story, or not, something that defines you, but instead, like, okay, if it's going to be a part of your story for a long time, it's how can I kind of set myself up for ongoing success by being around people who support me in it? Because I
Yeah.
do think that that's another thing that keeps people really stuck,
Yeah.
is surrounding themselves with people who are still in it. And sometimes that's unavoidable. Like, some family relationships can be really tough, or that's where I would say, continuing to have a great therapist, or continuing to, there's books, there's podcasts, there's creating spaces. I think we talked about this a little bit before we started recording, where you have people to look up to too. So maybe you can't curate a circle. Maybe you're in a very tight-knit community you can never get out of. Okay. But could you look on your phone and, curate a space that feels really safe to you, people who represent a recovered lifestyle that you to continue to emulate? And could you mute the people who aren't doing that in the world? Which we were talking about, again, offline. There's a lot of people. It's a very triggering environment right now online. And, some people are giving out medical advice who have no business doing so. Some people are making people wary and fear mongering certain foods. And that's probably never going to stop. So if there's a gift you could give yourself, I would say it's conscious consumption of not participating in activities, and not engaging with certain creators or content that just feels harmful to you. I'm not saying I'm not going to go comment on their stuff. I'm not going to, it's not my battle, but it's something that you could think about, especially if you feel more likely to get sucked into that kind of stuff. If you want to protect what you look at, and if you want to seek out people who really champion recovery or body positivity or healthy living in a real way, not healthy for the sake of aesthetic purposes way, like that would be another thing that I think would be really helpful, because it's like, we know the therapy things, maybe we have all the tools, but if we're constantly inundated with things that we find very triggering, it almost feels inevitable that if you're consuming that content every day, you might have a lapse, right? So I guess protecting your space, not so much to the point that you can't tolerate seeing something like that, because I think then that gets back to, we can't live in a bubble. So a lot of therapy tends to be about, okay, we gotta encounter these people sometimes. And, Aunt Sue is going to say something about your body when you go home on Thanksgiving. Like, what do we want to do about that? But in your quiet, safe spaces, if you can curate other people that feel safe there, maybe that's something we could do.
Yeah. I love that. And I love that you brought up like online, because social media is so integrated into so many of our lives, the majority of our lives. If you look at surveys on like Gen Z and millennials using social media, and it can be triggering to an eating disorder or disordered eating behaviors. So yeah, cultivating that space. And I think it goes back to like getting curious and taking inventory and being intentional about what you're doing. Maybe you are doing well in recovery and then you're noticing your mood's off and things like that. Look at your media consumption and like, oh, even if it's not like disordered eating content, if it's people that don't make you feel good or you're comparing yourself to, mute, block, whatever it is, get offline for a little bit. I don't know if you've ever taken like a social media break. I haven't taken it for a prolonged period of time, but even sometimes if I leave my phone upstairs and I go hours without being on, I'm like, I do feel a lot better. I love social media though, but I'm like, oh, it's nice to take some time away.
Totally. I'm really bad at it because of the work that we
Yeah.
do. But I will say I don't scroll. I'm usually on
Okay.
there creating. I like
Yeah.
sometimes I scroll and I find myself doing it, but I'm usually on there like trying to be inspired or
Yeah.
or editing something. So like half
Yeah.
the time I gotta put it down because I'm like, I gotta get to a call and I didn't even
Yeah.
finish that stupid video, right? But I feel you on the when I don't do that, when I'm mindlessly, like we were talking about bedtime,
Yeah.
when I don't have separation and I'm already so tired, somehow those are the nights I end up scrolling for hours. And I'm like, I feel you almost feel hungover. You haven't had a drink and you wake up and you're like, why am I hungover from staring at my phone? It has such a drain sometimes on the body.
Absolutely. Well, Lauren, I've loved talking
Oh
to
my
you
gosh.
so much. And I want to be mindful of your time and the listeners' time. But as we're wrapping up, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you would like to touch on, or anything we touched on but you want to expand upon, revisit as we're wrapping up the conversation?
No, I feel so excited. I haven't talked about the book with many people, and it was a really long road. Creating a book is actually, it takes forever. And my therapist kept reminding me that, like, this is my story. And when I was just talking to you about it, like, this is one of the reasons I became a therapist. This is why I put myself out there every day. Like, I just want people to feel seen in this book. And I feel like that this conversation made me feel really seen. So thank you. And I felt so connected to you while we were talking about this. And I just love the work that you do. And I'm just so excited to have these conversations. But I also feel really excited for other people to read it. Of course, now there's sirens outside. This is Manhattan for you. But I feel so grateful that it exists and that I hope people are going to find it helpful. And that's all I want, is just if someone can take inventory and be real with themselves and get something out of it, that would be my goal, my dream.
Yeah. And the sirens are just adding to that oomph at the end there. Well, like I said at the beginning, the last question I ask all my guests is, where can people connect with you and where can people buy your workbook?
Well, thank you for asking. It's Lauren E. Larkin on Instagram, and then Lauren E. Larkin on TikTok and YouTube now. I started YouTube recently, doing a week in my life content over there if you love a vlog. And you can buy my workbook at the link in my bio. So
Okay.
I think it will be like everywhere that you can buy books. I should know the answer to this question. It's definitely on Amazon. And that's where I have it linked in the first link in the link in my bio. So if anybody is struggling with an eating disorder, or if you are struggling or you might struggle, you may have a lapse and you want to have it on hand just in case, that would be amazing.
Awesome. So I will put all those links in the show notes of this episode. But once again, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on. This was such a pleasure. Obviously, we could talk for hours.
I
But
kept you up way past your bedtime. I'm so sorry.
no, it is absolutely fine. But thank you for sharing your knowledge and your personal experience. And yes, everybody go buy her workbook, or recommend it to somebody that you think may benefit from it if you have not had personal experience with a eating disorder. But thank you once again for coming on. This was so lovely and so great.
Thank you so much. So much.
And thank you, the listeners, for joining for today's episode of Psych Talk, and I will catch you in the next episode. Bye. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Psych Talk. Please rate, review, and subscribe to the show. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to follow me on all socials at Jessica Lee, PhD, and the podcast at Psych Talk Podcast on Instagram.